Okay, so welcome to CIS-41A. You got through some of the security classes, and I'm sure that you will enjoy this class. This class is going to be a lot more hands-on. I know I see familiar faces, so most of you already had me, and if you haven't had me before, my name is Casey Nguyen. You don't have to call me Dr. Nguyen, right? But I did get my PhD in 2014 in cybersecurity. I have a Master of Science in cybersecurity. I currently work for the college as an associate professor, and I hope to be here for the next 8 years until I retire at 55. And so if you have questions, I built this program, so I know a lot about the classes. We are going to have additional certificate and courses that are coming, like firewall-based courses. There's going to be a new certificate that I'm going to be working on. So if some of you are interested in that, if you are not in the apprenticeship program and if you want to know how to get work experience while you're in school, right, you can ask me and I can share some information about that. But today we are going to talk about being an analyst. And in this course, you are going to do exercises and use tools that's going to help you understand how to be a cybersecurity analyst. A lot of students ask me, what's the difference between being an analyst and being a specialist? So in this course, it's going to be more clear. Okay? All right, let me share screen so I can go over the syllabus. Sorry. Okay, so this syllabus you can find in the first module of your course. I'm sorry, I usually put things up a little sooner, but I was wrapping up a couple of grants and then I was finishing up the winter session. So this class is going to help you prepare for the CYSA Plus, which is CompTIA certification for the cybersecurity analyst. We do have voucher for the students in the apprenticeship program for this particular exam. It is a harder exam than your security class. I know some of you already got that. But if you enjoy learning cybersecurity, you will enjoy the content of this class. So this is going to elevate your skills and knowledge in security, right? And how to function as an analyst. So it gives you the overall description over here. We are going to do hybrid, so there will be time that you are going to be doing work outside of class online. Like, for example, I'm going to give you a practice exam toward the end of the class, and you are going to have to do that on your own time, right, using the internet. But while we're here in class, I'm going to try to address the concept through the lecture and the lab demonstration. If you want to complete or redo the lab outside of class, you can, right? The lab is actually scheduled for online, but while you're here, if you can, try to finish it so you don't have to worry about it later. So we're gonna meet every Wednesday from 5:20 to 8:30. I usually go all the way to the end. I'm gonna give you time to work on your lab exercises so I can help you. Now, in this class, we're going to talk about these topics. So first, today, we're going to talk about threats, a little bit of review between threats and risks, right? And then vulnerability. So some of that is already been covered in Security Plus or CIS-27. However, we want to readdress that and really give you a big picture on how this can be carried into your role as an analyst. So we are going to do some exercises looking at risk and how to protect the network from an understanding of a risk. So as an analyst, you are going to be determining what kind of threats am I facing? What kind of threats is my network facing, right? Sometimes that can be from logs. A lot of the time we read logs. A lot of the times we might be having to assess. So you're going to run some tools, write up some report, and be able to determine if your tools that you have is adequate and how you can prevent future threats by having a different defense mechanism or the current defense mechanism. So you will see some pen testing techniques in this class. I know some of you already took that class, right, for ethical hacking, or some of you are in it this semester with me. So you will see some of that. We are going to do a lot of vulnerability assessment because I truly believe that the weakness, right, in systems, people, and the network really is the whole insecurity, right? It is job security for us. However, if you have preparation, that means you understand your vulnerability. So we are going to do some intelligence gathering. We are going to do some recon. A lot of these really stem from ethical hacking or pen testing. But as an analyst, you are going to do some correlation, right? Understanding how certain threats can be stopped, right? Using certain technique. And then most importantly, you have to learn the trend. Right now, and in cybersecurity, trends are always changing, right? You know that now generative AI is in the picture. That will be a little bit different for us. And yes, you will have some lab that's going to use some AI component. I'm rewriting some of the labs. And then we're going to look at some of your security tools. Some of this is review, like your Wireshark, your packet tracer, information, looking at your routing. And then you're going to look at some monitoring tools. Okay. Now, vulnerability management, as I mentioned before, that's going to give us an understanding of preparation. But the important part for most company is whether it's going to meet regulation. You can do a lot of things, but ultimately it has to follow a certain structure, right? What the law requires, because a lot of the times some risk is actually gonna have the company pay more money, right? So they have to look at, is it gonna meet the state law? Like if you're looking at privacy law for California, and we're gonna talk about that today, or is it gonna be federal law, right? Like something like HIPAA, okay? And then we'll touch on incident handling because a lot of the times the specialists handle this part. They are responding to risk and threat. But the analyst is going to look at it and say, how can I fix this problem for now and the future, right? So we're going to take a look at how the impacts of the incidents and how that can correlate to the big picture for our network and our systems. And then we'll take a look at some additional security tools, architecture. We'll take a look at how we can hit some area. Malware is a big area, right? And then looking at prevention is more proactive approach than a reactive approach, which is detection. I think the majority of the organization operates with. So when you work at the SOC, which is your security operations center, a lot of the times the specialists, they work in this area. They are detecting the issues, right? And then making sure that the issues doesn't persist or it will spread, etc. But the analyst is going to take this information and then bring it into prevention. So how can we design a security solution that's going to help us, right, become better in operations and then prevent future issues? Okay. So here's your learning outcome. We will be able to analyze, right, and implement some threat defense mechanism. We'll be able to look at vulnerability and manage it. We will make sure that it follows internal network policies, and then also what the state and the federal requirements are. Now, if you work with global companies, sometimes you will have to address that in a global manner. And that can be different for a different part of the world. So in our exercises, we're going to start working from monitoring, investigating, analyzing, and securing your network components, your systems. Every system belongs to some form of network, whether it's home wireless network, right? Whether it's like a transactional system where you insert your payment cards and that gets sent to a database, etc. for records. Okay. So the prerequisite, you have to complete CIS 25 and 27. Some of you have probably done that either here or online. But I would encourage you, okay? I saw some of you that took my 40A class. Cybersecurity, 80% of it is networking. If you're weak in networking, you will not be able to do as well. Okay, because a lot of the times every system is interconnected, even AI at the data center, right? So the agents that they're building, it's really incorporated in the data center, which is a large group of networks. So ultimately, if you're strong in networking, you will do well in cybersecurity. So that might be something that you need to brush up on, or if you are good in networking, that's going to help you. Okay, so that's my recommendation. Okay. This course will transfer to some university. If you're going to Cal State San Bernardino, it will directly transfer. If you are going to Fullerton, I think Fullerton has a computer science with a cybersecurity option with an emphasis. You can also go to SAC. Sacramento now offers cybersecurity bachelor degree. That's a little far. Cal Poly Pomona has a forensic program. They focus more on forensic, but they do have a cybersecurity. So I know a lot of you want to get your associate degree, right? Your certification and be continuing in your apprenticeship program. So we are going to focus on CYSA. I will update the bookstore with this book, right? I usually don't put my books in the bookstore because it's not required. But if you want to buy the book, by next week, it should be listed in the bookstore. Do you need to get the book? If you get the book, you can do the exercises like the practice questions in the book. I don't require it. You have your notes, which came from books and also other sources. Okay. We will be, hopefully, I'll be able to cover that with some grant funding, but we will be doing a practice exam in this course. Okay. Some of you are familiar with Test Out by CompTIA. Now it's just called CompTIA, no longer Test Out because they bought them out a while back. I will turn this on probably after spring break when you come back. I will send you an email for your access license. I think I have enough licenses. If not, we should be able to hear back from the grant people by May. So we'll be able to continue to support some of the funding, but we ran out with the money this year. Okay. And if we don't have access to this, I will create a practice exam for you to use and we'll talk about the grades. Do you have any question for me? Okay. So when you look at your course, right? I put everything in module like this, okay? It has the due date at the top. Usually all assignments and lab are due at the end of the week. So if you turn it in today, right, I will grade it after Sunday. You can look at the module and you can see there's assignment. You can also click assignments and it also lists assignments by category. So each week we typically have one assignment and one lab. Okay. Some weeks we'll have a quiz. And we might have some other activity, but typically you have only 2 things to do. Because I know you're busy, right? I'm taking a training course right now and they're giving work like graduate level work. It's a lot of work, right? So I understand. Okay. So, all right. So if you follow, you can just, when you access your home on Canvas, you will be able to access your assignments. So if you click the notes, it will open up the page. You can download it or read it on there. You can also watch the video from prior sessions. And I typically repost the video for the current semester after the session. And then the assignments also have video and the lab also have videos. Okay. All right. So now we know the structure. There will be a practice exam, like I said, for CYSA Plus. And I will not accept late submission for the practice exam. This should be open for about 6 weeks. So you should have enough time. Do not wait until the end. I've had students that contacted me saying that they just started the practice exam at 10 p.m. and it closes at 11:59 and they don't have enough time. So make sure And it would allow you to have multiple iterations. So if the more you do it, the higher the score, the higher the average is your grade. Okay. Your quizzes is going to be like 2 or 3 quizzes, 3 attempts per quiz. The highest score will be recorded. Typically, quiz is going to be due at the end of the week, which is Sunday. Now, final exam, it will be a Canvas exam. Okay. You don't have to come to class to do the final because this is a hybrid course. I will be here. So if you want to come and take the test here, you can, right? But if you want to do it at home, you just need to make sure that you have Lockdown browser and make sure you download it from this course exam page, okay? Do not use the website for Lockdown to download because it will not allow you to access it. You will have opportunity to do extra credit, and extra credit can be like a review game. Sometime if there's events that's related to cybersecurity, I will allow you to attend or encourage you to attend, and then you can submit that as extra credit. And extra credit will never exceed 10%. Usually it's like 7%, if any. So if you're at the cusp between, let's say, a B, a high B, and an A, and that's going to help, okay? I've had students in my programming online class that I just completed. One student, he's really far from that gap, right? And he was trying to tell me that with the extra credit, will he pass the course? Well, that's not the case, right? You cannot just earn knowledge and skills from just doing extra credit. You have to do all the other work as well. So extra credit is good if you just need that little boost, okay? All right, so here's the grading category. Quiz is going to be 10% of your grade. Assignments and participation will be 35% of your grade. Lab activities will be 20% of your grade. The CYSA practice exam, this will be 15% of your grade. And keep in mind that this is a time practice exam, so 90 minutes, 90 questions. And it is designed like the real exam, okay? And then your final exam is going to be 20% of your grade. Do you have any questions? Okay, no questions. Okay, so student conduct, I don't usually have this problem with all my classes, but in case if you have issues or issues with other students, make sure you let me know. If you have issues with me, let's talk about it. And if academic affairs needs to be involved, then we can bring them into the picture. I do reserve the right to drop students if I don't hear from them for a long time. So if they're not participating, if they're not coming to class, if they're not submitting, I usually try to send them a message. But in the case that if there's no activity, but if you need to drop from the course, make sure that you look at your drop timeline, because if you drop late, you will have that W, and the F and the W plays into financial aid for completion percentage. So if you have low completion percentage, that might impact your financial aid. So just keep in mind. So for behavior issue, I do reserve the right to dismiss student from class. I hope that doesn't happen, right? And then do your own work. I know AI is there. I encourage you to use it to learn, okay? I do too. But at the same time, when you go to the workplace, right, you want to make sure that you give credit where it's due. So when there's citations or references that you need, just make sure you include it. Okay, if you need accommodation like extra time on tests, a note taker, etc., you can go to the ARC. They will be able to help you document, and then they'll send me a letter. And with that, we'll be able to help you, right, be successful in this class. And here's my contact information. I'm best with email. If you call this number, it goes to my desk. And my office is at the Makerspace or iMake Innovation Center. You can find me there sometimes, right? Usually when I'm on campus, if I'm not in this room before class, right, I might be in my office. So for Monday and Wednesday before class, I usually come here about a little bit after 4 because I try to stop by there a little bit. And then if you can't make my office hours, you can also pop in Zoom. Okay. Tuesday, I am on virtual only. And then if you can't make those, just send me an email and then we can make something like an appointment. Any question? Okay. All right. So let's get started, right? So next, I'm going to go over the notes and the assignment. So if you can have those open, download those. You can save them to your USB. And if you need a USB, there are a few up here, right? And then if you're hungry, there's snacks. Just make sure that you don't get the sugar and the chip stuff on the keyboard. Okay, so in the first unit, you can find the notes here. You can read it on the page or you can download it. Now, Canvas, my Canvas course is going to be open as long as they let me open. So after this class, you can still find it. You just need to click all courses and it will be listed there. Okay. And then on the next page, you will find the assignment. So we'll do that now. Okay, so right now we're going to talk about the analyst role. I think I kind of preview it a little bit. When you look at these positions to apply, you're going to see that the analyst role, the salary is higher. The criteria for the job is definitely higher, okay? And a lot of them, I know, they require like 5-7 years experience, correct? But what I encourage you to do is from now until maybe in the next year or so, you should try to get internship. You should try to work on apprenticeship where you can get placed. So if you have consistent experience for over 2 years, it's a lot easier to get work. Cybersecurity is just like a lot of industry. It's kind of hard to break in. They like to put you in IT first. But that's typically, entry level. There are positions like cybersecurity specialist junior level, right? That's something you can look for as well. So in cybersecurity, we live with the triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. CIA, right? We learned this in CIS-47 and other security classes. This really governed everything that we do, okay? And we're going to break it down today. You're going to see some of the tools that will be relevant. So, what does it really mean for your role? You, as an analyst, is going to be defending systems and networks using defense in depth, right? You guys remember this? So what does that mean? That means that we don't have one answer for the security. We would have to do many different things. It encompasses the areas, right, to really build a good security solution, okay? So it uses overlapping controls. It might be a long list, right, if the security at that organization is lacking, or it might be a short list, depending on what your current state of security would be. So the goal is that you want to make sure, right, data is assets, people are assets, right? Making sure that things are confidential, right? Like certain identity, health records, etc. Data has integrity, right? You don't want your account information to be having errors. And then things are available. Your network, your systems, right? Your resources must be available. Okay. So with the triad, we can go through and answer the first 3 questions. So number 1, describe the responsibility of the cybersecurity analyst. You can add your own answer in, right? You don't have to copy verbatim on what I had. I just want to put it here so that way you can see. The way I teach is you can see, you can hear, right? You can type and you will remember. What type of knowledge and skills must you have in this role? So we are responsible for confidentiality, integrity, and availability, the CIA. You must have a strong understanding of your threat environment. So we're going to break down different areas of threats. But what can you consider a threat? Can people be threat? Sure. Yeah, right? Like a rogue employee. You see this on the media, okay? People can also take internal data and sell it, right? Because data is assets. But threats can also be what? Malware, right? So there's different type of threats. And so we have to really look at the landscape and say, these are the threats that I'm working with. And will it stop there? No, right? It's always transforming and transitioning. And then we need to respond to the threats. So if we have a rogue employee, how do you respond to that? From a business perspective, what do? Build a case and get rid of the person, right? But it might not be that easy because when you're looking at a business strategy, you also have union that's involved, possibly, right? You have to be able to investigate and actually build out that information. So the analyst, his job is going to be investigating. What made this person a rogue employee? Right? Are they circumventing information that's private to the organization? Are they selling data? And then we need to characterize the risk. So this would lead you into risk assessment. So characterize the risk, really determine the risk category, right? The level of the risk. So some risk is low and some risk is high. And then what we can do is we can also implement solution that's going to address the risk. Looking at attacks, right? And that comes back to what we talk about here. And then implement security controls. So the money, right? What they're paying you for are these things. Knowing what the threats are, the risks are, and how to stop it. So our commitment to security in general, or cybersecurity in any position, is to make sure that we achieve the objective by using defense in depth. So defense in depth uses multiple overlapping objectives. So this is why when you're studying for your certification, they have different objectives, right? That really geared to determine your knowledge in those areas. Now for 3, these are only a few things that I would list, right? So it's like an overview. You can list more, okay? So for an interview, they might ask you, can you tell me how you can achieve CIA in your role, right? You can say, oh, easy, confidentiality. I can implement firewall rules, right? Modify ACL, access control list on the firewall. Block the threats, right? But when you're blocking threats, what will happen is you have to continue to grow your block list. Because threats come in different variation, different form. You know this because malware changes so quickly, right? Attacks format changes quickly. Attackers are different. Now, firewall can also be implemented with rules where we only let it pass, right? If you're looking at border border firewall or even internal firewall, we can build the access control list to, right, what it allows. And if you work with cloud, right, like AWS, Azure, what you see is you also need to implement control in the cloud. That's a little bit different than what you see in general system. And then confidentiality, we can implement encryption, right? We'll come back to this further down the line. Integrity. So what does really integrity mean? What does it mean, right? The meaning of integrity is to make sure that it is intact. It's not changed. It's not modified. So if your data, right, ABC, it needs to be ABC from the time that you open it to the time that you send it, right, and receive it. Now, can that be changed? Well, sometimes if you have man-in-the-middle attack or some form of modification throughout, now with AI, right, that can also be in different ways on different approach. So what we can do is we can start with hashing all computer system, Mac OS, right, Windows and for PC, all operating systems is designed to make sure that there's a hash key for every file that you create. Like right now, if you save your file to your USB or your computer, it has a hash. Okay. So OS is designed to do that. And what we can do is we don't just generate a hash and call it a day, right? Your job in security is to verify, identify what that hash is, and if it's matching. Okay. So how can I tell if the attacker goes into my systems if they modify anything? You guys ever see those media where they talk about like so and so was breached, right? And this is the amount of data that's been taken. How do you think they got that information? They did an assessment, right? One, they can follow that from, because attacker has a target. Usually they would look for a specific system, right? So they can follow it through the network. And let's say it's a database, they can go in and take a look at, right? Either it's a table, the entry in the database, and check the hash. The hash will be different if it's modified. Okay. And it's designed now that you would encrypt, right, on your database, like your transactional database. For example, your account information, they encrypt that column if you're using relational table, right? And then you can also generate hash for your database content. We can monitor. So the big key in preventative is monitoring, right? Keeping an eye on it, making sure that we check it. And then SOD, separation of duties. So what does this mean? Can you tell me what that means? Separation of duties? Anyone know? Access and least privileging? Sure, but you don't give everything to one individual, right? That means that, let's say you have a manager, right, that overrides all transactions, okay? Now, highly likely the risk of that manager committing fraudulent is high when we assess that, right? Especially if they're there for a long time, if they don't take vacation, so they assess that from an HR perspective. Now, if they have access to a specific system with high private information, right? So you want another individual to also have similar privilege, but you want to make sure that you control access for these people and monitor their access. Separation of duties really require you to look at, right, access management for user accounts, groups, etc. Okay, especially when we deal with like all our systems. Okay, it really pertains to sometimes role-based, right? Sometimes rule-based, and so on. That's access management model. Okay, and then availability, making sure that we have fault tolerance, right? Not a single point failure. So if you have one server, right, that's a single point failure. So you need to have a server that backs up that server in case it fails. So they call it a failover server. You need to have a clustering, so a group. This is what cloud is really designed to do. And then a backup. So a lot of this is review from 27, right? Okay. So if you're looking at the notes, it talks about CIA here. Next, we're going to get into the privacy and security. So earlier I mentioned that data is money. It is true, right? So if you ask Google or even ask AI, how much is my social security number? Let's say that someone can go into an organization, take a list of their clients that would have social security number and account information, put that on to Excel or whatever format, and sell it. How much do you sell it for? Depends, right? The quality of data is really going to speak to the price. On average, it's going to be a few dollars, right? Roughly $3 or less. That's kind of scary, right? Someone can take your social security and be able to reuse it for other purposes, okay? And this is what happens when you have data leak. And so the information that you are storing is going to need to be categorized as well. We'll talk about like how we can manage data. So personal identifiable information, things that will pertain to the individual. I work with people that would deal directly with healthcare. So HIPAA compliant require major things with PII, right? Also health PII. So what you see is personal identifiable information would be information that would relate to individual. In the United States, we use Social Security to really identify the person, right? Now, whenever that there's a breach, usually company has to notify their clients, and then they must change privacy policy. This is what you see in your email and also letter mail, right? Postal mail that's sent home, that they are required mandatory to be able to notify you if they're changing things, who your information goes to. Your driver license number, right? That really uniquely identifies who you are. So the information needs to be protected based on regulatory standards. Okay. So these are just some examples. Any question? So California has specific privacy regulation, right? So the companies that operate in California, they have to, number one, follow federal law, number two, follow state law, right? So for example, California requires that whenever you are recording individual voice, you have to inform them, right? This is why when you're on Zoom, if you're recording, right, you have to inform the people that you're recording. Now, when you go to like 7-Eleven and they have a camera, usually they can post a sign saying that you're being recorded or smile you on the camera. Sometimes they don't record voice, so technically they can record, around the perimeter, etc. So they might, when you watch the video, the surveillance video, there might not be voice, right? Okay, so let's talk about vulnerability and threats. So in definition, vulnerability is a weakness, and it could be a weakness in the device, the software, right? The system, the chipset. IoT is known for that, right? Firmware is always an issue. Things like, if you have Ring camera, that's part of IoT. Or sometimes it could be physical, like somebody left server room open, right? Or if you have a switch that anyone can go by and unplug cables, that's a physical vulnerability. Okay. you know how to disconnect the network that's the fastest? Cut cable, right? So what you see is they have to run cable through fault ceiling or raised floor. So in cybersecurity, we also deal with physical security too. So we look at those vulnerability. So you have to assess threat and vulnerability. The weakness is going to help you understand what you need to do. Okay. So if I don't have patch system, I need to run updates, update my firmware, update my software. I know Windows update sometimes is tedious, right? Sometimes that can cause problem. But in an enterprise, you always test updates before you install it. And then you gotta make sure that your users is trained. Human is number one in vulnerability, right? People click phishing links. They might get a phone call and they would give up their information. So if you train your users, that statistically shows that it's less vulnerability. And then we have threat. So source of exploit. Some of my former students ask me, well, exploitation changed so quick, right? So if you search, right, from 1 year to the next or 1 month to the next, you have tons of exploitation packages that's released to be able to exploit different things. There's exploitation for, Android. There's exploitation for systems. If you use Kali Linux in practice, you already see there's stuff in there that it's already equipped to use because those are the common exploits. So vulnerability can be exploited, and this is what you see with a lot of the attacks. Attacks don't just happen because, it's happened because something has been forgotten, usually. Okay. Some of the big form of attack, you guys remember like a year or two ago when they had the Vegas attack with the casino, right? So word says that there was insider threats that's played, that's involved. And some of that they can investigate, but a lot of this kind of PR, they don't tell you that information because, who's going to want to go and stay at that hotel if your data is going to be out there, right? So sometimes they cover that up with the PR. So your threats are going to be your attacker, could be rogue employee, could be malware, right? Okay, for number 6. I want you to remember the difference between vulnerability and threats. That's going to come up on your quiz and final exam. You are going to have question on risk and possibly this formula. Okay. I remember learning this many, many years ago, and it comes up for every single certification. It comes up for all my graduate level classes, right? Because this is really built like the core in how we look at operations and determining the risk. So how do threat and vulnerability related to risk? So what if you know this, right? What are we going to do? We need to determine the possibility. Sometimes that can be measurable in numbers, right? Like percentage, that the threat might exploit the vulnerability. Like an attacker would use the vulnerability to enter your network or enter your system. So the equation would be a risk is threat times vulnerability. So numerically, if you give it like a point or score, right, you'll be able to calculate that. And that is quantitative. Sometimes certain things you can't measure it like that, right? We like to quantify things because we are technical people, like data, right? A piece of your data can be worth, let's say, $10, $100. So if you lost like 1,000 records, this is how much you're going to lose. But sometimes you might have qualitative where it would be only measured with levels or some kind of label, okay? So we'll touch back on this later. Any question? Okay, where is this information coming from? So I'm going to come back to this a little bit. Right here, you can find security risk on the bottom of page 2. So the general accepted privacy principle, this is big for us. And I think now that there are a lot of regulations that have been passed, also in California and federal, that requires, right, organizations and individual to follow certain rules. Okay. And a lot of it is to really protect you as a consumer. So before, you probably heard that Facebook went to court, right? Now they're Meta, they went to court, Supreme Court. A lot of these tech companies, they have court cases because your private information, your account information has been shared out. I use Google. I'm an Android user. Everything is on my Google, right? All my data, my pictures, my private information could be on it too if I have files that contain private information. Now, a lot of time we click agree to terms of license and use without reading a lot of it. And they know that too, right? So sometimes you waive your risk to be able to utilize something. So that means that sometimes your information is shared. So whenever I go to a store and they're like, oh, sign up for this, you get a discount. I'm like, oh, my data, right? Like, no, I will not save $1 to give up all my information, right? So sometimes you need to use a system like your cloud drive for free, but then you also, your data on there, right, is also, you have to look at the ownership on how that's shared out. Okay. So here it talks about consent. So in court cases, they're going to come back and say, hey, this user consented. They said, yes, we can share their information. You consented when you sign up for that discount, right? So that's how you would see some direct consent that's being used. Okay. And then also how long they retain, how they use your data, right? A lot of it now is for advertisement with social media company and so on. And then how accurate and quality. So that the requirement, changed with the regulations, and also these are just some practices as well. So think twice about when you click that I agree, right? So just make sure that you think about the risk that's involved with that and what kind of information that you're giving them and how they share it out. Okay, risk management processes. We're going to have a chapter on this. Let me move 6 down in case you're still recording that. And then move 7 up. Oops. So for 7, it says, what are the processes in assessing threats? So how do I start as an analyst? First, you need to identify your threats. So where can I go? Firewall is a good place to look at like the logs. That's for the network or the system. If you can also assess like security, like CIEM has the management console also, it lists, right? So and so attempted attack from this IP, the public IP, right? Maybe North Korea, China, and so on. Okay. Or it could be malware, right? So you're looking at the sources of your threats and the events. This comes from logs. So I talked to one of my former students. He used to visit my class all the time. He's a risk engineer now. He makes $160,000 a year, right? He tells me teach your student to parse logs. That's really important. So that should be a practice for you. We're going to try to incorporate that in a later lab. But so be able to read the logs and understand which threats, right? And when it occurred. You need to do vulnerability assessment. You can use things like Nmap. Nmap usually tells you like an overview picture. There are other tools that you can use for servers. So vulnerability and the positions of those vulnerabilities. And then we would look at the likelihood of the occurrences. So how can I tell? In a month, if you have 5 incidents of that same occurrence, right? You would calculate that. And then looking at that in a year span, right? So going back to historical data is also important. And then analyzing that comparing to now, right? So if we're looking at transitioning from last year into this year, what kind of threat landscape are you looking at? What is the likelihood of something occurring again? So if we have issue with malware, you need to take a look at, okay, that means that our malware tools are not protecting our system, right? Possibly that we're running updates, but it's just not recognizing, because malware, a lot of the times it changes. And if that tool doesn't have signature or behavior reported, it will not detect or block it. Okay. And then you can also use like repository online to be able to check certain malware. And then the magnitude of the impact. What is the level for that? If it's high impact, it's going to cost a lot of money if you're looking at enterprise level, right? So we want to be able to reduce that. Sometimes you cannot reduce the risk completely. You know this, right? We're going to have to accept a certain level. So if you have high risk, you want to make it lower. That's your job, okay? And so we want to be able to determine the risk. So when we get the threats, we're going to say, oh, is that a high level threat? That's an analyst job, right? Is it going to happen again? What is the risk of this threat? So I have students that tell me they go for interview and they get asked question on this. So if you have not seen or read NIST information in their documentation, make sure you do that. This is going to give us guidelines and practices. It's important that we do. So they break down the threats into these categories. 1, adversarial threats. These are deliberate, intentional. And even if you have security control, they will undermine it. So some attacker, so the job of the attacker is to be able to perform their task and before, like, go into the target, take the data and leave, right? Make the data leak or take down the network, corrupt the system. There could be different goals and objectives. And knowing that, they're going to have to look at your security control. Their focus, their magnified focus is on your security control. They're going to study your security control. They're going to look at ways to override your security control. And that is considered this form of threat. And that an example I put here is disgruntled employee deleting company's data. They would purposely go and find ways to navigate to the data and delete it, right? Or another example would be the attacker looking at your security control and undermining it so they can achieve their goal. Accidental threat. This happens sometimes, right? Mistakenly perform an action to undermine security. Like turning off anti-malware software on the system to be able to, run a game on their computer, right? As an employee, that happens. So in IT, we're going to be like, they can't be doing that, right? So we need to make sure that we look at their access level and also train the user. Sometimes the user can click the phishing link. That happens a lot. The third category is your structural threat. And in structural threat, your control is exhausted or it's not holding up to what it's supposed to do. Could be that your system is old or RAM is not enough on your server and it's failing, right? Or your firewall rule is not effective because it's not configured properly. Admin account is default on there. That's a huge vulnerability. So if you're looking at vulnerability, you're going to correlate that to the threat. You see that now? So in cybersecurity, we also need to determine performance level of our system too, because it plays into the A of the CIA, availability. Then environmental threats. That will be man-made or natural disaster. Like earthquake, that can happen. Firewall in this region is popular. Sometimes you would see people trying to like bomb certain location, right? Or destroy certain things. What do you think about the cell tower? Do you think they have physical protection around the cell tower? You betcha, right? You guys ever go by the railroad and you see the trucks going by to monitor the railroad to check it? One, for safety. Two, also they have security. So there are boxes, communication boxes near the railway, and that's how they can determine like trains with tracks, communicate across the trains, and so on, right? So physically, they need to monitor those boxes digitally and also physically. So this is why you see companies that own railways, they have people that do the surveillance. So this, if we look at environmental threat like wildfire, especially for this region, you can do a lot with this, right? Your solution would be, it might be more reactive, like having suppression system, making sure that, there's fire retardant material is used in our data center, especially with cable and so on. And then also train people to also put out fire around the perimeter and having access to those things. So sometimes you would have to also derive solutions such for physical area. Any question? Okay. All right, so now let's do a little bit of practice. Now you're an analyst, right? You're just not like blocking things or changing things anymore, configuring. You are going to look at the cases and how you would be able to analyze it. So ABC company conducts cybersecurity training for employees 3 times a year. That's pretty regular. Usually they do like twice a year or 1 time a year. Focusing on malware, phishing, password protection. Each employee is required to complete the training once a year. So they offer 3 times, right? They're requiring everybody to do at least once. There have been 2 incidents per year over the last 5 years. Use the below table to determine the likelihood of the risk occurring as low, medium, or high scale. So as an analyst, you're going to use matrix like this and you have to do it, right? Okay, ready? Since they're doing training, this is 3 times a year. The case tells you that, right? They only have 2 incidents per year in 5 years. So that's considerably low. So the type of risk, we're going to start with phishing, exposing sensitive data. And that will be low because 2 in 5 year span is 2 times a year in the last 5 years is somewhat low. The impact will be low. Now, this you also have to determine like the type of, so there's other factor you have to look at. The type of users that they're targeting with the phishing campaign. And those users is privileged to certain data too, right? So this is more of a general assumption, right? But we have to look at the factor like the type of user, the data they access. Then the second area, so we talked about phishing here. So in the cases, you're going to bring these down and you're going to put them in the table, okay? The second area is going to be malware. So malware, a lot of times the job is to corrupt, right? Or prevent the system from being used or access the data, okay? And that could be medium. Because why is it medium and versus phishing for low? Well, malware is directly accessing two areas of your CIA, right? Malware usually it's going to sometimes also impact three, C, I, and A. It could change your data because of that's integrity, right? It could also make your data unavailable because it's corrupting, so that's A, right? And then confidentiality, it also would leak some information as well that will be privately. And then the user giving out password. So I really feel that this and this is probably equivalent. So if you train your users, at least 3 times a year, likely that they will not be falling for phishing and likely that they're not falling for giving out password, okay, because of this 3 times a year. Now, if you do it 1 time a year, that might be a medium, okay? So what do I do with this? Well, I need to take a look at the high level ones and I need to work on that, right? Start with that and work your way down, okay? Okay, then for number 9, so what are we gonna do with this table? After your risk assessment from the table, we would determine if they accept, avoid, mitigate, or remove a specific risk. So for me, right, if the employee break the rules, so if we have policy in place saying that you cannot disclose your password, you cannot give your password to someone else to use, right? If we have that in place and they break the rule, automatic dismissal. Now, some company are more lax. They would be like, oh, I will write you up, but likely it's going to happen again, right? So when I do an audit, I would go through and it would be like, okay, so who's at fault, right? Is it the organization that doesn't have the structure or is it their users, right? We're going to have to determine if it's the organization, we need to be restructuring their security solution so their user can do better. So a way that we can remove that problem is get rid of the problem, dismiss the employee. Now, some malware you can completely remove, right? Malware you can quarantine. That just means that it's contained, right? We should not delete the malware because the malware would usually it impact your system files. And if you delete the malware, it would corrupt your system. So we can quarantine the malware. Now, if you want to mitigate the risk, for example, if you do with the malware, because we're looking at these two, right? Then we can use effective software tools. So how can you determine the effectiveness level? Well, you need to take a look at like the detection of malware. If your malware is still entering your system and network, right, the percentage level on that, then you can see how effective it is. And if it's not effective, find another tool. Or sometimes some company they run multiple tools. So and then making sure that we prevent future malware. Now you know that malware changes, right? New malware is like change every 60% of new malware is born all the time, right? So this is, it's always going to be a risk for us. Okay, any question? Okay. let me go to maybe move 10 down. So you can work on that. Okay, so let's talk about access control. Sorry, I'm going to flip to the notes real quick. I know you're typing. Okay, so the threats, the matrix, we talk about that here, right? Security control. And it talks about risk acceptance, avoidance, mitigation, and transference. So I didn't touch, we talked about like risk removal, but we didn't talk about transference or avoidance. So I'm going to give you a case scenario. Driving is a risk, right? The risk of getting into car accidents and get hurt, we face that all the time. So if you don't want, if you want to avoid the risk, then avoid driving. Just stay home. Don't drive, right? Have someone else's drive, but then you can still get hurt and get in an accident. So don't get in the car. That's avoidance. Transference is when you buy insurance for your car. So you are at risk of getting in accidents and get hurt, but insurance take that risk because it's transferred now to them, and they pay you in the case that your car got damaged, right? So they replace your car, they fix your car, and so on. That's considered transparent. A lot of companies now use cybersecurity insurance. But if you read the media and also information online, right? A lot of times they might not even pay if you have a breach, because there's also like criteria, just like how insurance for car doesn't always pay when you get in a car accident. If it's your fault, they might not pay all of it, right? Or depending on the type of accidents also. So this is a way that we handle risk. Okay. All right. Before we answer the next question, we need to talk about network access control, your NAC. This is like an example, like a diagram that you can see, but it gives you some breakdown right here. You have agent-based. This basically need a software to run on the system. And then you have agentless that doesn't require software, but it's through the internet or the browser. And then you have in-band, which is a dedicated appliance between the device and the desired resources. So when you're looking at like next generation firewall appliance, that's considered an in-band, okay? It is a system that you connect the other systems to, and it's going to filter everything that's in and out. Or if you're looking at like network prevention system, your NPS, right? Those are also in-band. And then the out-of-band is when you need to have a server for authentication to grant the access. You typically see this for like remote workers, remote access servers, public-based type of access, like, you know, like if I have an e-commerce company and I'm selling products online. So you typically see an out-of-band based structure where, okay, the user can use guest account or they can create their account, but they're only limited to adding things to cart and checkout. They don't have access to the rest of the other area beyond the DMZ. Okay? So that's the difference. So an example of an in-band network access control, as I mentioned, that could be your firewall appliance, like a next generation firewall, a border firewall, right? Border gateway firewall. Can it be an application firewall? Sure, right? Depending on the scope and what kind of system that we're looking at. Or you can also use captive portal. So basically, in-band really means that it's connected on that line or on that same segment or on that same area of your network. Okay? To be able to control, you know, different things like what's allowed, what's not allowed, that's the firewall, right? So all of that is really for access purposes, based on rules, based on role, based on, depending on the model that you implement. Then for 12, it says, what type of network perimeter should be implemented to protect the company infrastructure? So when we say infrastructure, it really entails all your server system. If you have multiple data center, all your data centers. It could also have your applications. So it would be everything that would make your system work. Because when you're looking at like enterprises like Walmart, right? They got their stores, they got their data center, they got their warehouses. So all of that have their systems that are interconnected to update, right? Like inventory, transactions, all of those things. So all of those entail. So typically you would see firewall being implemented to control, and when we're looking at border gateway firewall, that really is like, when you say gateway, right? Think of it like a gate that you enter and leave from. So if the firewall blocks you from leaving or entering, then it's filtering. Okay. So why is it blocking me from leaving? Well, if somebody is taking a bulk amount of data and leaking that, it should also be able to check it. We didn't do a good job in some cases, right, where we are really good at blocking attacks, but we're not looking at insider threats. So now we're looking at like, oh, how can they circumvent from the inside, right? And then you can also use it to protect your web application. So in the DMZ level, right, that's open to the public. So when I say DMZ, that just means that these servers are internet connected. So you have your web server where people can go and visit your website. And why do we have an application server? Well, everything is web app, right? From the time that you log on to your bank account to paying your bill with your credit card to, so all of these needs to be also following rules. And then we would use the DMZ to restrict. Why is this important? Because logically, so when you look at that, you're like, oh, it's on the same rack. So some company, they don't have money to house their own data center. They would rent like AWS, right, for their servers. Well, it's a physical system on that same rack. But we logically designed it where that area needs to go through a firewall before we go to the private network, right? And the firewall, what it does is it's going to block, it's going to only allow specific things for the private network. And then it's going to direct, right? We would also use network system to direct everything to the DMZ. So when I type in, abc.com, then it's going to go take me to the web server. But then if I'm an employee, I would access the portal, then it would then route me into the private network. Okay. So your infrastructure needs to be really designed. This is why network is important, to really implement effectively on how you secure and implement control. Question? Okay. So if you're taking my ethical hacking class, you're going to spend 1 unit on firewall. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Tima. Yeah. So physically, when you're connecting, everything is on the same rack. Okay. You understand? So I have these appliances at my data center on the same rack. What you're doing is you're logically configuring, and also cable, sometimes you physically connecting in a way where you can logically divide it. It's kind of like this. I'm going to give you an analogy. Let's say that you have a huge property. Your mansion is on that property, right? And there's a guest house. So that guest house is like the DMZ. only the guest goes to that, and they have a separate gate. Okay? The main people who live in that mansion, you, is entering the main gate, the main entrance. But I'm gonna put a security guard there, right? At those gates. Okay? Yeah, to the mansion. So you, the owner, drive up, he's gonna be like, oh, this way, to the left, the main entry. Now, a guest comes, your friend, directly to the right? He checks the ID, he's the firewall, and say you go to the right. Okay. That's a DMZ, where your web server, some of your database, maybe customer email servers, they exist there. It's on the same property. You understand? So logically, we divide it into two areas. So one rack, the top might be all your private systems. And then on the bottom might be for your DMZ. Is it organized? But just in case here. So everybody is funneling and publicly not be in the same route. You drive up that same road to your house. Your guests drive up that same road, right? So the network goes that way. Everybody comes into the internet the same way. But when they reach your property, it gets directed into different areas. And in order to go from the guest house to the mansion, they have to bypass security. Understand? Oh. And that security is your firewall, your security appliance at work. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. Packet firewall. This filters based on packet. This is good when you also look at like attacks, right? You see this. I know some of you probably learn about different attacks. So the nature of the packets, your payload, really speaks to the nature of that traffic. Typically, if you monitor, so as an analyst, you have to look at like what kind of stuff coming in, what kind of packets are coming through. So if the packets look outstanding, right, or irregular, abnormal, right, it needs to be flagged by your security system. If it's not flagged, you need to find out. So why it's not flagged, right, and fix the problem. So that's why monitoring is important. Stateful, check your connection state. And then your next generation firewall, the reason why I say this a lot, because everybody uses this now, right? So if you want firewall practice, next generation is the deal. So it checks the users, the application that they use, the processes in the context of their application. So this is very useful. Then you got the web application firewall. It really looks at, like, it follows the rule. You tell it, this is the nature of SQL injection. It's going to do that for you. It's going to like block SQL injection. We do a better job in this now. So anything of scripts that goes into your, your form or whatever, it's going to block it. Okay. And then, or cross-site scripting. So a lot of the time we set up script rules for this to follow. Okay. So what Dima was asking is, do they really make a difference? Yeah, you're going to have to go through the firewall, the security guard, like I said, right? Internal network, your private mansion. This is everybody on the street. And then the DMZ is like your guest house. That's the separate area of your property. Okay. And then in the DMZ, you've got email server, web server, sometimes application server that is for the web. Any other questions? Okay, so let's talk about endpoint security. What type of endpoint security should we implement? One, you need to harden your system. So we can do this by implementing settings or configure your settings using group policy, right? You've seen this in Windows environment, in some of your lab exercises in CIS-47. You can also do this in Linux based, still a little bit different. So group policy really means that we are going to control access, right, based on specific rules for the membership of the account. All systems have some form of account. If it doesn't have a user, then it has system account. We also need to update the system regularly to make sure that it's hardened, because that reduces your vulnerability. So these things reduce your vulnerability, right? Which really lowers your risk. Then access control. We need to look at how privileges are given to specific accounts or groups for data access and network access. And then we need to look at security software. All of you probably have this, right? You have, if you use Windows environment, you have firewall is already in place. Your Windows firewall is equipped with the OS. All OSs have security mechanism. It also have anti-malware that's free. So, but if you want to use additional software, you can. So when I say endpoint system, what kind of system is that? Is it a server system? Is it a handheld device? What do you think? Just whatever Dr. Wynn says, I'm going to write it down. Okay. Okay. So endpoint systems are systems that, just like the name, right? It would be not a network system that is interconnecting with other appliances. Okay. So endpoint security really, so why do we care about that? Because the endpoint system in the big picture, it's still connecting to your network. And if it has malware, it would then spread to the network. A lot of the time, endpoint system would have users' accounts, if not the system account. So when you're looking at IoT, right, surveillance camera system, my surveillance camera, I can access it from anywhere, right? My data is encrypted. I have a user account to be able to access it and look at the data, okay? So with that, it would need to, the firmware needs to be regularly updated. I can't really do much with it because it's very limited in embedded system. It's like very limited. It just records and, store the video, and the user can go in and access it. But when you're looking at like more complex systems that would allow you to modify things or add files or whatever, you would have more of the implementation on how you control access. Okay. So you need to control access with data level, like using encryption, and you need to also control privilege access. So that way someone cannot go in and modify that. Okay. And then some system is either web-based or native, right? So how can they navigate through the system? Is it through a software, etc.? Okay. Okay, we're almost done. Any question? All right, the next section in your notes, it talks about reverse engineering. Okay. So this is a technique that's used to work backward from the finished product to the how it works and how it's built. And the way we do this is we would sandbox it. First, you need to not connect it. Then you create a sandbox. And you can do this with server system by using, implementing like a structure, a virtual structure where it would only be for that system alone. Okay. We're gonna fingerprint the software. So what do I mean by fingerprinting? Fingerprinting means that we want to look at the version of the software, if it has vulnerability, right? Nmap is really good for that. But you might not be able to run Nmap, right? So you can use some of the tools of the script. You need to take a look at the hardware, like the chipsets, storage. And then at the software level, you can decompile. So this is why programming language is important in this field. We would need to decompile an application, okay? And get it to your bin code and your source code. So how can I decompile? If a program is compiled by it's compiled by using an IDE, integrated development environment, I can use the same thing to decompile. So in Windows environment, right, applications are written with specific language. Compare that to Android or Mac OS. We know that. Okay. Like you would have C# compared to, like in some cases, Android would use Java, but it would also use other languages, and so on. Okay. And then in some cases, you also, when you reverse engineer malware, a lot of the times it's at assembly level. Okay. Because sometimes they write the instruction at low level. And a lot of the assembly language now use C compiler like ARM64. So having knowledge of ARM, assembly language, is also useful. Okay, so what's the future for me? Well, machine learning algorithms can be used to analyze your system behavior, as AI is here and is here to stay. And so does that mean that it's going to affect my job? Really, we build technology to streamline things, right? People might be fearful of it now, but I think a lot of the times when we look at it, like how we built cars so we don't have to ride the horse or walk, right? So in the long run, what you're gonna see is that we then would move on to really looking at, like, we would derive the solutions on what the algorithm is gonna give us, the results from that. Is it perfect? I mean, not far from it. Some people who created AI, they would say that, oh, my system is the best, right? Everybody's gonna claim that. But just like everything else, technology will never be perfect. Because I think if it is, then we would not continue to build it. So there's always room to grow. That's what I was taught, right? Technology is always going to have flaws. So that's what makes our job important. Okay. Any question? Okay. So we're at 7 o'clock. I'm going to stop the video. I'm going to take attendance. I'll give you a little break. And then when we come back from the 10-minute break, we will start on the lab, and I'll be here until 8:30 to help you. So I'll walk you through the steps. If you have questions, I'll help you. Okay? And so we should be able to finish the 50 steps in the next hour and a half.